This week's episode of the Autoblog podcast is brought to you by the Autoblog Daily Digest. It's a great way to stay updated with what's happening in the world of cars in just 2 or 3 minutes every day. Ask your smart speaker for the Autoblog Daily Digest to stay up to speed with the latest car news, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today is Associate Editor Byron Hurd. We're going to jump right in because Byron last week drove the Ford Bronco, perhaps the most anticipated vehicle since, I don't know, the mid-engine Corvette. So it's pretty exciting. Real quick show rundown. We're going to spend your money. We're going to talk about a V6 Ferrari. And Byron and I both randomly drove the Nissan Pathfinder. So, hey, we're going to talk about that. Bronco, though. That's what everybody's here for. It's kind of a cool thing to talk about on the podcast as we head into the 4th of July weekend. You went down to Austin, Texas, I think, for it. Got to do it off-road a little bit, too. We even have some user questions, too. We were joking offline that Byron's reviews were so thorough, there were no other questions. That was it. It was like a mic drop moment.
Yeah, so it's really tough to say like where to start with this. I mean, our review on this was, yes, quite comprehensive, and I'm not even saying that to toot my own horn. It was long. It was close to 3,000 words, so there can't be too much that we forgot in there. But on top of that, done a follow-up talking about the manual transmission that just went live Wednesday morning. We've got some other info here. We're actually going to do another follow-up later in the week. So we're touching on this a lot. And so what I actually thought I would take the time to do with this is answer some reader questions, of which there were only basically a couple. There was one we got from Twitter and one I got on Facebook from another friend. And then just wanted to kind of fill in the gaps I'm not going to say in our coverage, but just some of the things that we didn't really feel like we needed to emphasize in the first drive. And it's more maybe discussion-based stuff rather than, judgment calls. So, it's hard to even say where to begin, but I was just so impressed by this truck. It really does feel like a Jeep in the way a Bronco needs to feel like a Jeep in order to be competitive. But the front suspension in the Bronco makes a huge difference, especially on the road. It's one of those things where you don't appreciate how much better an independent front suspension can be until you go from a solid axle to an independent front suspension back to back and actually feel it. And we actually got the chance to do that because Ford brought a Wrangler Sahara 4-door, which matched up really nicely with the Outer Banks Bronco 4-door that I was driving on the road. And so I, hopped out of one and hopped into the other. And the difference really is immediate. It's the difference between really having to pay attention to your steering corrections and not even having to think about it at all. And until you get to experience that firsthand, it's really hard to describe how much less fatiguing it can be. Just it's a load off your mind. It's a load off your body. It's one of those things where you're buying a fun car. Of course, it's going to be compromised in some way or another on the street, right? Whether it's because it's, a sporty low slung car like a Miata where you just don't have a lot of space. It's tiny. It's kind of crashy over bumps and stuff like that because there's just not a lot of car to absorb it. But you're trading it off because it's fun and small and maneuverable, and all the things that you like about it have downsides. Same is true with an off-road vehicle, right? Where, especially if it's tuned for hardcore off-roading, which means it's probably going to be pretty stiff because you don't want those big, dramatic, cushy body motions when you're off-roading, because if you get onto rocks and you start bouncing around too much, you're likely to have some part of the body that you don't want coming down on something hard doing exactly that. So, the suspension's really firm, the ride's not great, the steering's probably kind of vague. The Bronco just does those little things so much better than the Wrangler. And it's really been brought into focus by the fact that we've had the chance to drive them back to back. So it's going to be a Wrangler versus Bronco thing here for a while. And the reader who actually had a question for me came out with another alternative kind of track for this, which was discussing the Toyota 4Runner. And I don't know, Greg, like when I think of the Jeep, I kind of think of it, the Wrangler specifically, I think of it as kind of a class of one. While, we've had the Nissan Xterra in the past and we have the 4Runner now, and have for a long time, not like it's new. I don't necessarily see them as direct competitors. I'm not sure everyone agrees with me there because I look at the 4Runner and I see it as slightly more on-road focused, even though it is a very capable 4x4. The fixed body, the lack of a removable top, the lack of a two-door option, short wheelbase and stuff like that, to me, it almost seems like it is in a different class. And this reader was asking, like, from that perspective, would you consider a Bronco a decent alternative in terms of like interior space, day-to-day usability, putting kids in it? And I mean, you have kids and I don't, so you can speak to this better than I can. Like, do you think of a Wrangler 4-door as an alternative to a 4Runner? And then would you extend that same courtesy to the Bronco 4-door?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would, but to go back to sort of your, like, one of your original insights, I would be willing to make some of the compromises as far as just a little bit of a tight space and a bit of the more work you have to do with the steering to have a fun car, to be like a cool dad car, frankly. I think, Wranglers are, fairly like somewhat agreeable on-road SUVs, depending on the trim you get. But compared to almost any other segment, they're really not. You're going to really bounce and jounce over broken roads, and again do a lot of work on the steering. To me, the 4Runner has been sort of one of the Wranglers, like, rivals, foils, whatever you want to call it, because there's been nothing else. Now that there's a Bronco, and what you're telling me is actually quite exciting. I actually kind of threw up my hands that. I'll see if you agree with this. It sounds like it can be a little less work to drive a Bronco than a Wrangler. And that's where, honestly, the 4Runner, it's bigger, you can load it up and it really becomes, in some ways, a little bit of like a premium Toyota SUV, which honestly is not what I would get. Like, give me like what are the TRD trims? That's what I would want. And my kid would love the bouncy, like jouncy suspension. So that's how I would do it, but my use case is a little bit different because obviously I work for a car website. I'm more willing to make some of these trade-offs, but you see a lot of them. A lot of people are also willing to make that trade-off. 4Runners, Wranglers, I bet you we're going to see a ton of Broncos. They're going to sell the heck out of them. So yeah, I mean, is somebody who is looking for like an interesting family car, and I'm always sort of in market for that. It's heartening to hear that, hey, the Bronco could be it, because the Wrangler could be it. We've done some family things in Wranglers, a lot of family things, frankly, just because they were coming through the press fleet at a pretty good clip for a while. And it's like, hey, what do you want to do this weekend in this Wrangler? But, again, there are some compromises. So that's interesting.
I agree. And I think, honestly, the biggest thing holding Bronco and Wrangler back in the family department is just the lack of even kind of a rudimentary 3-row option. Like, you look at Land Rover Defender, which offers that even in the 110. 4Runner obviously offers it. And, those are third rows that are there really to be used in a pinch, not to be used every day. Like, it's not supposed to be a minivan replacement, right? Like, it's serviceable when you need it, but not ideal for the rest of the time. And with the Bronco and Wrangler, you're not even getting that much. And so like Sean, not Steve, who asked the question on Twitter, mentioned he actually has 3 children, which, I mean, that if that's tight in a 4Runner, it's going to be miserable in a Bronco or a Wrangler. You really need to look at the Bronco as kind of not a carbon copy of the Wrangler footprint, but pretty darn close. And I mean, even Land Rover, the third row in the Defender, they're adding a third, even longer wheelbase variant of that vehicle as kind of an acknowledgement that even the 2-row or the 4-door Defender isn't enough Defender for the number of seats it has inside of it. So that's kind of the struggle. Like, once you hit 3 small people, they're still people, and they're going to be pretty miserable if they're shoulder to shoulder back there for long stretches. So I don't know, leave your partner at home, leave one of the kids sit up front, then maybe you're in good shape. I don't know if that'll fly. Maybe you'll be the one staying home if you suggest that. But, it's certainly, it's doable if you're used to being cramped, and it probably wouldn't be my choice otherwise. But, if the idea is to take the Bronco or take the Jeep somewhere for the weekend, maybe you're willing to make those compromises on a shorter term basis just to make it work.
It also depends too, just thinking of like hauling children and dogs around. 3 kids in a Wrangler or a Bronco, I would say that's probably not the way you want it to work. But if you also have like a minivan or a very large 3-row SUV, then hey, the Bronco could be sort of like the complement. Maybe somebody and, one child and the dog go in the Bronco, and then somebody else takes the 3-row SUV or something like that. And that was actually, it's funny you bring this up, like sort of as a parent, I have evolved back in just my like emotional car buying purchase to the Wrangler from the Gladiator. And here's why. Because when I first saw the Gladiator, loved it. I was like, this is awesome. This is like one of those old Jeep pickup trucks from really any decade. Pick it. They've had a bunch of good ones. It's new. You can get it. It's going to have all these capabilities. It's a pretty good mid-sized truck. A little expensive. Lotta. Drove them both. And I actually kind of came to the conclusion, like for my use case, I tend to like load up things as opposed to like loading things into beds. So that's where I came in with like, hey, the Wrangler and the Bronco are a better fit for me than say the Gladiator, which, frankly, I don't really need a truck, so that's how it kind of like when you think of like from a family use case, it swings that way. Or get a bed cover, get some sort of tonneau cover, and maybe it works out that way. But
yeah, true. I mean, and you look at the Gladiator too, and if you do need the pickup utility, I mean, it's a great package, especially because I don't think people realize just how much smaller the Gladiator's body section actually is compared to the other mid-sized trucks. So, like if you live like where I do here in suburban Michigan, you have these really, really tight driveways where, you've got your house on one side, the neighbor's house on the other, and you're kind of threading through to get to your garage somewhere in the backyard. If you park like a Colorado or a Ranger in my driveway, you can only get out on the side closest to my neighbor's house. You can't. There's just not enough room to swing the door on the other side of the car on my side. And when you look at the Gladiator, because it has those short little Wrangler doors, and because the body's actually a bit narrower than its specs suggest because the fenders are kind of punched out, but the middle part isn't, you can actually open the doors on either side of that truck when it's parked in my driveway. And that's something that, like, from a practicality perspective, makes a lot of sense for me. And granted, most people who are buying trucks probably have a little bit more space, but it's something to consider, especially if you're kind of eyeballing the Maverick and thinking, oh, like I need a truck that's smaller. The Gladiator, if you realize you actually want big body on frame capability in a slightly smaller package, might actually be a better alternative for you than Maverick. But it really depends on, as you said, use case. It's what you need to be able to do with it. And of course, American truck buyers like to buy for I might have to move my entire house one day contingency and then, live with the rest of it on a daily basis. So, if that's the universal belief, then no one should buy Maverick. But I mean, getting back to what you were saying, I'm actually kind of considering down the road replacing my personal 2-door Wrangler with a Gladiator because I could stand to have an upgrade in the practicality department, and I have my little Matrix, which is a great little hatchback. If I need to haul things that need to stay dry, then I've got that. I can drop the back seats in that and have tons of room. I can haul a dishwasher back there if I want to. So,
nice.
And just having that at my disposal gives me more flexibility in the other things. Speaking again to your other earlier point that, a lot of people buying Wranglers, Broncos, anything like that, in many cases, they're not buying them as their primary use vehicle. It's a toy, which is true also of the sports cars we were talking about earlier too. So it's one of those categories where, the compromises are a little more livable, but if you intend to buy it as like a one-size-fits-all kind of vehicle, it gets a little iffier, and that's where things like the 4Runner or even the longer wheelbase Defenders shine. Granted, you're spending a lot more money to get the Defender or a Land Cruiser or whatever, but they exist for a reason. They make that practicality case a little bit better than something like the Bronco or Wrangler does.
So I am curious as we talk about all these like daily driving and potential like mainstream uses of the Bronco. What is the Broncoiest thing you did with it? Like, did you climb a rock? Like, did you drive like inches from a cliff? With a river rustling by you? the last Jeep trip I did, that's like what it was.
Yeah.
There were parts where you're like, wow, you really could die. I'm not really qualified to do this, but okay, and whatever. But so what was the Bronco version of that like?
It was pretty impressive, and it's something that Bronco customers will actually get the opportunity to experience if they want to, because Jeep took us to their off-rodeo site in Austin. Well, outside Austin, it's actually closer to Marble Falls, Kingsland, up kind of northwest of Austin itself. And it's beautiful. It was clearly like it was already a park or an off-road park of some kind that they bought and are grooming specifically for these things. And if you buy a Bronco, you automatically get invited to come out. You don't have to bring your own truck. They provide one for you. So if it's anything like Ford's Octane Academy was back in the day, essentially what you'll be responsible for is getting yourself to and from and probably booking a hotel room, although they might have resort rooms blocked out or something like that. But essentially all you have to do is get yourself there, show up. They give you a truck for, I think it's a 2-day program for customers, and you get to try out your type of vehicle, not your actual vehicle, but essentially what you purchased on their track. So you get to beat up somebody else's truck. What's wrong? What's not to like about that? So similar to what they did with, I don't remember the name of the program, but they had something very similar for the Raptor too. But there were sections, especially on the trickier trails, where a spotter was an absolute necessity. There had to be somebody outside pointing you in the right direction, or you were going to get stuck or roll it or do something stupid just by virtue of not having sight lines. There were places where we were rock crawling, and I had the car tilted so far back on its butt that I couldn't see anything outside of any window except blue sky, and was entirely relying on one of the trail spotters to kind of lean over the window and give me hand signals saying, okay, you need to turn a little to the left, turn a little to the right. So we pushed it pretty good. And the part of the property where I was doing that, the trail, was the most advanced one they had. I mean, it was meant to demonstrate really low speed rock crawling. But that's the one where I had basically the most simple Bronco that they had available for us to try out. That was a base model, 2-door, that had the Sasquatch package. That was it. So, and Sasquatch is your 35-inch tires, your locking front and rear differentials, and basically that's it. Like you're getting all the off-road goodies and none of the kind of superfluous niceties. And I feel like that's very much like I'm going to buy a Bronco, but I'm going to spend as little money as possible doing it without sacrificing any capability package that everybody on the internet claims they want, and yet no one ever really goes out and buys. So it was interesting to get to experience that. And it brings up another point that I kind of want to touch on a little bit, especially comparing Bronco to Wrangler. So with Wrangler, if you want locking front and rear differentials, big tires, all that stuff, you have to buy a Rubicon. That's just the way it works. So a Rubicon starts with destination around like $40,000 to $43,000. A base Bronco starts just under $30,000, and then the Sasquatch package costs about $5,000. So on paper, you can get the capability of a basic Rubicon from a Bronco for about $5,000 to $7,000 less. But in the real world, that's not actually true, at least not yet, because you can't buy a base Bronco with a manual transmission right now. The automatic adds money. And in order to bundle the Sasquatch package, you then have to check the automatic box. So going from the $30,000, whatever, for a totally stripped down base model 2-door Bronco to a Bronco base Sasquatch package is actually about a $7,300 jump right now. So it's close to, after destination, everything, about $38,000. And so that narrows the gap up to Rubicon a little bit, to the point where the Wrangler actually has some appeal, because with the Rubicon, you're getting more base equipment. And you also unlock some things that you can't get on a base Bronco, but you can get on the higher end trims like Wild Track or Badlands, which are a little more comparable to Rubicon. So if you're going to be spending all the money in the world, it really doesn't matter which one you go for in terms of capability. You're just connecting sway bar, the trail crawl features and stuff like that you get in the Bronco. All those you get on your higher end ones. There's an equivalent with Rubicon, essentially. And you'll pay about the same amount of money to get them, especially because up at that point, you're talking about trims of the Bronco that are only really available with the 6-cylinder engine and are thus only available with the automatic. And you're getting the fancy upgraded 4-wheel drive system and some of the other little like toys, essentially. So, I mean, to really get the loaded up Flex Bronco, you're spending just as much money as you would on like a loaded up Flex Wrangler. It's just down at the very base model equivalent for both. You can get more capability out of the Bronco for less money if you're really judicious with the options. So while we're calling the Bronco kind of like our preliminary victor without having the opportunity to really drive it and the Wrangler back to back extensively at the same time at the same place, it's really not like this is like, just a total conquest by Ford. I mean, it's incredibly competitive. It is better than a Wrangler in many key ways, but the Wrangler has going for it the fact that you can actually find one, and that will continue to be true for the next year and a half at least. And price advantages in that too. Like the fact that you can buy one means you don't have to, offer someone 20 grand for their slot in line or something like that. Like you can buy one for post a sticker, and you can walk away with it tomorrow instead of it being, 2022 before you have anything in your driveway. And Wrangler also has going for it the fact that you can get a stick on just about every model, which isn't true of the Bronco. And it also has the 4xe and the Rubicon 392. Like you've got these two powertrains that Ford can't touch for the time being. There's no hybrid Bronco yet, and there's no V8 Bronco. Probably never will be. If I'm being honest, I just don't see that in Ford's plans. I think it's more likely that they'll pursue electrification as a power option rather than going for a bigger engine, like for displacement or more boost alone. It's one of those things where you look at the F-150 hybrid, and I think that thing has 400 something horsepower. I don't recall off the top of my head. That would be more than enough in the Bronco to be like a Raptor Bronco essentially. So I'm inclined to believe we'll see either maybe a larger EcoBoost V6 or a hybrid system of some kind for the burlier version of the Bronco. But for now, if you want anything kind of more interesting like that, Wrangler has it and has it right now. So, there's still reasons to buy a Wrangler. It's not like, Ford shows up with the Bronco and now the Wrangler is suddenly irrelevant. It's not even like, it's not close to that situation. We got two really good products where we used to only have one. That's a win for us. We don't need Ford or Jeep to win this battle in order for us to come out ahead, because just having options is an upgrade. And, depending on how you define the segment, whether you include things like 4Runner or not, or Land Rover up there with the Defender, which, at its price point, I would say that alone eliminates it, but not everybody agrees. Some people have, unlimited budgets and just want to have the most fun. So it doesn't matter whether it costs more as long as it does more. So, there are a lot of good options out there right now, and with everybody being in love with trucks and SUVs, that's only going to continue to get better, I think. So, if off-roading or even just like the off-road look is something you really appreciate, really hasn't ever been a better time to be buying a car.
You touched on a couple of things I find interesting, specifically when you talk about the price. I feel like Wrangler has been a little bit more expensive because it hasn't had any real competitors. So it's like, hey, if you want this, well, you got to step up to this. Nobody there, especially domestically, that would be like a true direct competitor for them to, face real direct competition. So I think that's part of it. And I think also, though, in the last 2-3 years, basically since the new generation of Wrangler launched, Jeep and FCA and now Stellantis have, I think, wisely been playing defense. Like everybody knows the Bronco is coming. So, okay, what are we going to do? We'll roll out some more powertrains. We're going to do some different things with it. Even the Gladiator, you could argue, is a little bit of a, like a pincer movement, if you will, to try to, outflank Ford. And I think, the Jeep is a very compelling product in and of itself. I am truly torn when you talk about Wrangler versus Bronco. Which one, if it were your money, would you buy? I would truly have to drive them, very similar trims, figure out what I wanted, that drive experience to be, because My most recent like Wrangler experience is it's about a year old now, just because I haven't seen one come through since in a while anyway. And I liked it, of course. It's fine. It can be okay, but it is a lot of work to drive. And for me, that's okay. But it's not perfect either. So there's that. And if like I got in the Bronco and I was like, this is like 15% better. Still, it's more work than say, I don't know, a Chevy Blazer or a Honda Pilot or something. Okay. You've already calibrated your brain that way. That would be like sort of the lens through which I would, kind of view my purchasing decision. But it's really tough. And it's interesting too, because when you look at the Wrangler, it's such an iconic design that never changes. And I don't think it really should. I think they did a really nice job with the most recent generation of refreshing it very subtly with things like the headlights and the tires. Even like there's like this kind of chiseled belt line that, bisects the greenhouse that you got to really look in only certain trims that do you really see how it like affects the silhouette. Almost in a way that Porsche has done with the 911. It's really been, I think, solid. Bronco's the new kid on the block. It's a throwback straight to like that first generation, I want to say 66 to like mid 70s. You see it and it's immediately cool, in the way that the Mustang was when they went back to a very traditional body style about 15 years ago now, away from some of the, the more conventional modern ones, if you will, that 90s, 2000 look. And that is tough to beat because there's some people that are going to look at that and be like, oh my gosh, it falls into almost like the dream car category. Then you flip it another way, or you look at it another way. And, I was just having this kind of random conversation about the Bronco and the Jeep. And, just they were like, hey, well, no, I still rather drive a Jeep. I don't want to drive a Ford. And it's like very just like, again, like almost like a bar stool conversation. Like, well, what's cooler? The Jeep? The Jeep just has built into it all of this gravitas because it's Jeep. Bronco can probably start to get into that territory, but there's like obviously nothing wrong with the Ford brand, but they make everything from like, go up and down the lineup, and that's what it's like to be a huge mainstream brand. That's also the name of a car company, the second largest American car company. Whereas Jeep, you do still get to distill that like, Compass, Yeti, NATO strap, pick your like cliched, gear, and you can distill that into like the Jeep experience, which they've then tried to proliferate across the lineup. But so I guess that's a really long-winded way of me saying I don't know which one I would pick. I am curious, what did you think of the Bronco manual, though?
It's actually very good, and I have driven the Wrangler manual just briefly when they did the launch a couple years back. And my personal 2011 Wrangler is a stick shift, and the manual transmission in that is just total garbage. It's serviceable is like a polite way of putting it. It works, but the new Wrangler and the Bronco both have very good manual transmissions. They've got good feel, good feedback. You always know which gear you're grabbing. And the crawler gear in the Bronco, which technically makes it a 7-speed, is really interesting and it works really well. And it allows a lot of flexibility that you don't get in a Wrangler just because, in a Wrangler, when you really want to crawl, like you want to go very, very slow, then you have to put it in 4-low because that's the only way you're going to be able to limit your practical speed, especially when you're going downhill. The Bronco lets you stay in 4-wheel drive high, put it in the crawl ratio gear, which is locked out just like reverse because they don't want you accidentally shifting into it when you're trying to shift up and, scattering your engine and transmission all over the ground. But it lets you get those low speed benefits without having to actually shift into 4-wheel drive low, which is great because being in 4-low means you're multiplying your torque, right? So you're putting more torque through your powertrain when you're in 4-wheel drive low than you would be in a different gear at the same speed. So the idea is that going into the crawler gear with the regular 4-wheel drive high or even 2-wheel drive high on the Bronco saves you the wear and tear but gets you that low speed that you want. So it's a nice compromise in situations where you're not necessarily like locking differentials on, sway bar disconnected, we're going to go over this boulder, but you still need to be able to creep along at a low speed. And it would be really handy, especially if you're out trail riding with a bunch of other people who might have different vehicles with different capabilities, and you just kind of want to hang back, let them take their time, where you can essentially just kind of let off the clutch, coast along behind them until you actually encounter something that might require some work. So it's great. It's a lot of flexibility, and it saves you time, it saves you frustration. It's really handy.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice feature. When I think back to the Wrangler manual, and it's been a few years since I've driven one. I drove one more recently than an 11 model. Let's put it that way. I drove I think the previous generation. It's a rough transmission, and it's tough. It's a lot of work. The clutch is I don't even know what's going on with the clutch. It's just it's a workout, for your calves and your heels and your Achilles heels. It's a lot of work. I've done it off road. When I did the Rubicon back in this is over 10 years ago. I did it in the primary vehicle I did it in was a manual Wrangler with let's see, what did it have? It was a 4-door, and we took the doors off. So it was fun. It's a great memory, but man, that was a lot of work, and I think, would I probably get a Wrangler or a Bronco with a manual? Probably hard no. But it sounds like what you're saying is the Bronco at least is maybe got an option that is less work. I don't know. What do you think about the shifts in the clutch, I guess, in the Bronco?
It's got great feel to it. And
Okay.
Of course, like anything new, you get some of the features that have kind of trickled down to regular manual transmissions are even more useful when you're off-roading, because you have things like hill hold. So if you do stall it or you start to roll back, the brakes will kick in and hold you in place. So, and you get that with the automatic too. And also with the automatic, especially on the higher trims, you get the one pedal driving mode, which is really handy because it kind of simulates being in a super low manual gear in a stick shift car in an automatic, where it's going to hold it really low. You essentially, you push the accelerator down to go faster, and you lift off of it to slow down or stop completely if you take your foot off. So it gives you the same kind of fine control you get from being in the creeper gear in the manual transmission, without having to worry about the possibility that you might ultimately stall the stick if you actually get yourself into a hairy enough situation. So you can get a lot of the same feel with the automatic without a lot of the headache, which it still makes it the more appealing transmission if you're serious about off-roading, frankly. And I think that's been true. Even like the hardcore 4x4 enthusiasts at this point, I think, kind of agree that automatic transmissions are good enough these days that there just really aren't that many compromises. And it seems silly to insist on stick shift when it's kind of becoming the inferior choice when you're really trying to tackle difficult obstacles.
Well, I remember vividly one of the spotters on the Rubicon was sort of setting us up for the next obstacle, if you will. And he looked into the Jeep and he goes, "Oh, you guys have the manual. That's harder. Automatic's easier." And I'm just like, yeah. What do you want us to do? Trade Jeeps at this point? We're in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
I'm not sure how we got in this one. Looked cool. It was green. So away we go. Looks department. Bronco's got that really retro vibe. The Jeep has never changed since the 40s. I mean, it has. But I mean, it's still a pretty evolutionary design. Do you have a preference?
I really don't. I like them both quite a bit, and just about equally. You can argue that the Jeep is kind of old-fashioned and boring at this point, but I don't think it is. I think they still manage to look good, even though they're about as ubiquitous as a Toyota Corolla these days. And I really do appreciate what they did with the Bronco styling. My family owned a first generation Bronco, so I look at it and I see my grandmother's old car, which I think is a good thing. I think they did a good job with that, with invoking their heritage, and I think they managed to make it work in a way that it feels like it's a new vehicle. Like, you look at it, you don't think, oh, well, it's just a retro throwback and there's nothing modern about it. And that's not the case. Like, it's got the size and the presence you expect from a modern 4x4. And it does it without being too aggressively in your face about the heritage angle. I think it's a pretty good balance. And I would take either one of them in a heartbeat. I don't, there's nothing about either one of them when I look at them stylistically and go, oh, no, couldn't deal with that. They're both quite good.
Yeah, I would say the same. I would, even though I don't really have a verdict on which one I would pick or rate or do a winner. I might lean slightly to the Bronco just right now, and I do like how the Wrangler looks very much. But the headlights, the silhouette, the wheels, it's a pretty good look. If you're asking me, I do like things that are retro-ish, and that's a good look. It looks good across the trims. I wouldn't say decidedly better than the Jeep, but just looking at pictures, and what I've seen on the roads, it's unique. Now, that being said, to go back to one of my earlier points, like once there's like fast forward to 2023, wonder what that year is going to be like, right? And there's like thousands of Broncos on the road. The Jeep may sort of revert back to being like the cooler play, if you will, because it's like, oh wait, still a Jeep. You see as many Broncos as you do Ford Escapes. Okay, the Jeep is still like a Jeep, and you can literally never take that away from the Wrangler. So
yeah, especially because the one risk that Ford kind of took with their whole Bronco family branding thing is a lot of people already think the Bronco Sport is the Bronco, and that alone will probably serve to kind of dilute its image a little bit, for lack of a better phrase. Especially we live around here, we live in Metro Detroit, and I mean, Bronco Sports are everywhere. They've only been on sale for a few months, and they are it's just they've multiplied.
Did you get a Bronco Sport when you were vaccinated or something? Like, what is going on here?
Yeah, I figure now at this point they kind of just hand them out whenever you get your lake house, which I think every Michigan resident gets one of those. So I don't know. I'm still learning. I'm only a year and a half into living around here, so.
But I will say this: the Bronco Sport, it's either a brilliant move or it could, like you said, dilute it, because in some ways you're diluting the Bronco brand, or you're expanding the Bronco brand, depending on how you look at it. You could be increasing sales. You might be cannibalizing the Bronco a little bit. But I mean, they really are two different vehicles, though, too. Yep. And you could also be creating more demand for the Bronco. Like, hey, you could get this now, as opposed to waiting, and then getting in line and bribing 3 or 4 people and, doing it that way. So, I mean, we'll see.
In a way, it's kind of given me a greater appreciation for the strategy that Jeep's employed when expanding its lineup, where you look at like the Compass and the Renegade and the regular Cherokee, not the Grand. You look at them and none of those would you ever mistake for a Wrangler on the road, because they're so visually distinct, especially the Cherokee, which would be about, size parity with a Wrangler. You look at it, you're not going to think, oh, there's the new Wrangler. No, that's never going to happen. With a Jeep, where with Ford they have a little more kind of homogeny between them, where there's the possibility that even those who are more familiar might accidentally mistake one for the other, which you'd never have to worry about that from the other side of the street.
All right, I think we've really dove into this. Check out Byron's stories. He has 2 of them up this week. One focuses just on the manual transmission experience off-road, which that's a hike, that's a lot. And then there's, of course, the full 3,000-word review up on the site, which went up Monday. Do check that out. If you're listening to this over the holidays, it's definitely worth. Go back and read it. You're sitting on the couch at night. You've already put out the campfire and you're just, Netflixing it, if you will, until bedtime. Pull this up on your phone. Definitely worth a read. Really cool. Nice job, by the way, Byron. I don't,
Thank you.
Like to give out compliments on the podcast, but when somebody cranks out a 3,000-word report like that, that's a hike. So that's a really good read, and everybody, I do encourage you to check it out. We'll include the links in the show notes. Any final, I don't know if you want to just restate your conclusion, your verdict, if you will, Byron. I don't want to put you totally on the spot here, but go as far as you're willing to go.
I'll say that if you're trying to make a decision between a new Bronco and a new Wrangler, and you need a car anytime in the next 24 months, just forget the Bronco even exists. Go find the best deal on the Wrangler that works for you and enjoy it, because Wranglers have amazing resale value. And if you change your mind in a couple of years, especially in this climate, the penalty is not going to be that severe. Lease it if you must, whatever you got to do. Just, you've got options. The Bronco is worth waiting for. And, it'll be just as good in 2 years as it is right now. So, you don't feel like you need to go out and spend $30,000 more than your budget really allows just to be one of the first, because it's not going to be rewarding enough to be worthwhile. It's very, very good, but it's not worth that.
Cool. All right. So again, check out all of Byron's great coverage on our site. Again, we'll include those notes in the show notes. But let's move on to the Nissan Pathfinder. I realize we're about 40 minutes into the podcast, so we do still have the Ferrari V6 coming up. Is it a Dino replacement? Maybe not. And of course, we will spend your money. But we will wrap up the drive section here with the Nissan Pathfinder. Literally got out of one, I want to say 18 hours ago. And then Byron did the first drive. Just had kind of a short loan here. I actually had a little bit of a moment of serendipity. I have our long-term Palisade literally at the same time in the driveway. So it's easy to do a little bit of a brief comparison. I would say this, and curious to hear what you think. I feel like the Palisade, just because, again, it was almost like a white space move for Hyundai, they went all in on it. The Palisade is a beautiful vehicle. It's a great value. It feels just well-rounded in many different ways. Obviously, like our long-termer is relatively, I would almost say luxurious. It's like $48,000. Pathfinder is quite good. It's a major upgrade from what it was. It's not as good as the Palisade. Like if you asked me which one would I pick, I would go Palisade like 70% of the time. Like it's not like a coin toss. It's like I feel like the Palisade's a little bit better in some of the tangible ways and also in some of the intangible ways. You know, it looks and feels a little more premium. But like I said, Pathfinder, big step up from where it was. It's a pretty compelling product. I kind of, as I was driving it, I kept thinking, this thing's kind of gutsy. It's got a little bit of a character to it, you know? Maybe it's even just the name Pathfinder. Mine was a premium trim, came in a beautiful shade of forest green with just gorgeous, like kind of like truffle brown leather interior. That's the color of the Porsche 911 Turbo S Cabrio that I actually also had in the fleet this week. I don't even know what I'm doing with all these cars. I don't think Nissan uses the same terms as Porsche does for their interior palette, but it's a really nice interior. Mine had the captain's chairs in the middle, so you can actually take that console out and move it for more storage. So I thought that was pretty good. Decent engine. Steering's like okay. I was actually reading your review, and I noticed you kind of really called that out. So I was trying not to be like too jaundiced with that, like, what's with the steering? It's got a little bit of that, like, I won't say forerunner, but it's got a little bit of that like kind of off-road vibe when you're driving it. Yeah, I mean, I would say this, I liked it. Like if you've owned Pathfinders before, or you're cross-shopping it against, the Pilot or the Palisade or the Kia Telluride or any number of other vehicles, it's definitely worth checking out. And by saying it's not better than the Palisade, I would say the Palisade is darn near close to like among the leaders in the class. And to me, the Pathfinder feels almost like kind of like a GMC Acadia, like middle of the pack, very respectable product, looks kind of good depending on if you like you're vibing on the design or not. Not really anything in there that's super revolutionary, but I liked it. I know it sounds like I'm throwing a bunch of backhanded praise at it, but I mean I did like it. And I think it's definitely a good step up for Nissan.
Yeah, I agree. And I went into that drive with virtually no expectations, just because I've been that the old Pathfinder was getting quite old, and it was a pretty known quantity. I mean, it was that the CVT and the V6, and it worked, but it wasn't exciting, and it wasn't that refined, and it wasn't that quiet. So it was just kind of like, well, it's an affordable option that gives you the space you need, and it's reliable enough to not be concerned if you're making an initial purchase. So I think they did a really good job of smoothing out the bumps. It's not necessarily that like the parts about it that are really good are so much better now that it's making a case for itself just on those merits. It's more like the parts of it that were subpar to like straight up disappointing have been brought up to the level where they're about equal with everything else. And so it's a very good kind of like jack of all trades, master of none. But I agree with you, they did really go for kind of a more commanding road feel, like a higher up, bigger, wider, blockier kind of presence. Like all the the interior design is all straight lines and all that kind of stuff. It kind of feels like, maybe you're in an Armada or something like that, where it's just like a whole lot more truck than it actually is. And they're even kind of leaning into that with their marketing. They're not calling it an all-wheel drive system. They're calling it a four-wheel drive system, which has caused some consternation where, like, how do we define one or the other? I mean, it's all-wheel drive. It's, it, and honestly, it's weird because their all-wheel drive system is actually slightly more fuel efficient on the highway than the front-wheel drive setup is. And it's kind of an incidental benefit of the extra trim they put on it for the four-wheel drive actually ended up making it slightly more efficient on the freeway. So it's there's some good trade-offs in it, which is nice. I mean, it's always good when there's an upside, an incidental upside to something you want, which is the all-wheel drive system and the kind of more off-roady look. But I agree with you. Like they're definitely leaning into the Pathfinder theme, the idea that it started as kind of a more off-road ready vehicle than it is now. And I think it works for them from just like a stylistic standpoint, which is kind of what they need. They need to stand out somehow because it's such a crowded segment. Everyone's in it. There's really nobody left who doesn't have a large 3-row. And they're not going to win on any one killer feature or even a combination of them, and they're probably not going to win on value because Hyundai will chase that until they don't have to anymore. And so it's one of those where, like, you don't have to feel bad about buying it, but it may not be your first choice or the most exciting on your list of test drives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to put it. They'll probably sell a fair amount of them because it is exactly right what the market is asking for right now. Yeah. And I mean, I actually think it's a good move to try to play up the Pathfinder, the 4-wheel drive, the air quotes 4-wheel drive. Mine had like very pretty big wheels on it. It looked the part. I was a little nervous when I saw this kind of gravelly, like sort of new construction site. I was like, should I go into it? And then I was like, well, one, how much trouble could I get into for doing that? And then two, like, it's rained for like a year, it seems like. Like, no matter what kind of all-wheel drive system this thing's packing, I mean, the car can't sink. That could be a problem. So right. I didn't. But so it goes.
They had us go out to the Hollyoaks RV park with the Pathfinder on our drive. And I mean, we didn't do anything that any 3-row crossover with comparable tires couldn't have done, but it was more just to like remind you, like, hey, like these things aren't completely incapable of going off pavement. It's just maybe not their natural habitat.
And that's actually, I think, a good thing, because when you are buying these things, many times, like if you're going to the cabin, the cottage, wherever you're going, you got to go on soft roads to get there. And it is good to know that you've got some capability.
Absolutely.
Usually size is the best asset. But yeah. Did you, when you were at Hollyoaks, did you point the Pathfinder so tall that all you saw was blue sky around you? Is that how it went?
No, we did go up some of those. They have a couple of those big hills there, but there's still enough kind of bearings that you don't completely lose yourself out there. It's an approachable park. It's very open when you go out there to play. They kind of hand you a map and say, good luck, don't hurt yourself. So they didn't design anything to be so completely challenging that you might actually get into real trouble if you're, not too comfortable with what you're doing.
It's like a state park, isn't it? Or a county park if you want it to be. So you could even just go like pack a lunch and pay a day fee, just like any other state park or county park if you want, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be pretty bored to do it. I think you technically have to ride in as a passenger and somebody who has permits. But I don't know. You might be able to walk up to the booth and just pay the passenger fee, but then walk in. But I probably wouldn't recommend it because it is so open and kind of, Wild Westy. There's the risk that someone just kind of like drives over the wrong thing and rolls down a hill and runs you over. So you probably want the protection of a vehicular cage if you're going to wander around.
Got it. Yeah. No, I wasn't thinking, hey, let's go play Frisbee. I was thinking more like, well, maybe the next time I get an off-roader, like, I don't know, a Pathfinder or a Palisade, I guess, which I do have, just go ride around up there and take the family but maybe not conquer the hills, if you will.
You certainly could. I mean, especially if you just wanted to check it out. And actually the parking area there has a lot of spectator space, really. Like it's not necessarily designed that way, but there's an overlook kind of area along the side of the parking lot where you can see a good, I don't know, close to half the park. So you can, see what everybody's up to and maybe get a better idea of how your car might be able to handle it. So
I like trees. I like dirt. I don't mind a little bit of water. Rocks are really not my thing. So that's my off-road thing. And I actually more or less enjoy the adventure of going through it versus, hey, we're going to go up this steep incline, then rock it down. I don't know. It's such is life. But
Sure.
let's talk about the V6 Ferrari. This is a interesting car. It's a 296 GTB hybrid. Great headline here. Joel Stocksdale wrote it, our news editor. I think he wrote it. Could have been Greg Race, actually, as I think about it. Somebody wrote this headline. This is plug-in to 819 horsepower. And it does, if you read the piece, have more horsepower, or it's more powerful than the F8 and the Roma. Looks pretty good, I think. Anytime there is a new Ferrari, I think it's worth talking about. Call me old-fashioned, but I come from the generation of a new Ferrari is debuted. It's probably worth talking about.
Yeah.
This is interesting for them. I think, we haven't seen a V6 Ferrari in a while, if you will. 3-liter displacement. There's a hybrid configuration set up here. 8-speed dual clutch, 62 miles an hour in 2.9 seconds. So say 2.8 maybe to 60, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Looks pretty good. What do you think?
I honestly, I love the idea. I love the notion of this powertrain, and I mean the figures are definitely there. I mean, and that's a Ferrari. It's not going to be a slouch, but I am just so drawn to the styling of the Roma that it's hard for me to get excited about anything else they have. I just think that thing is completely gorgeous. This is fine. It's just, whew. We have the Roma down there at the bottom of the article about this, and it's distracting me from the article. That's how much I love it.
Yeah, the Roma is really a great looking car, and some people I saw on the socials were talking about this thing as like a Dino successor. I mean, not really, but I mean, if you want it to be, it could be. I guess let me put it that way. If you're like a Tifosi and you want to try to bring some of the past alive in this current thing, sure,
Yeah, I gotta say, I actually, some of the rear end styling, this is going to annoy any Ferrari purists who are listening, but if you look at it dead on from the back end, I get a little McLaren out of that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just don't know if it's a good thing. So I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
I'm intrigued.
That wow, you're really opening a can of worms there as I'm thinking about it here. Because I like McLaren design, but I don't like all McLaren designs, and sometimes it seems like they're a little incomplete. Yeah, I see that. Just first glance, not so much in the taillights, but just in the general vibe. Yeah, I see what you're talking about there. I like it. It's looks like this is an in-house design by Ferrari too. Doesn't really look like Pininfarina is doing much for them these days. I don't that was a thing. Everything was like a Pininfarina design for years. Seems more like their Centro Stile is doing most of the design for their cars these days. So,
certainly works.
Yeah. I mean, what I think you've seen in the last 10 years is Ferraris have gotten a little more technical, a little more aggressive, and the Pininfarina stuff was maybe meant to be a little more swoopy, like a little bit some of that 60s vibe, which I liked, but this might feel a little more contemporary too.
Yeah, agreed.
So yeah, that's the Ferrari Dino. I mean 296. I'm kidding. Anyways, so yeah, that's the Pathfinder. That's the Ferrari V6. Let's spend some money. All right, this one comes from Derek. I'm looking for a new vehicle and have a short list of cars picked up. The fun part of this spend my money is that I live in Japan, where he can pretty much get anything he wants worldwide because, get this, he works for an export company and he can buy from Japanese auctions. So that's literally anything here. Has a family of 3 kids. It's the second person who is written into the podcast with 3 kids. So, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Family of kids, 5 to 14 years old. I guess what we can say about this is where I was going with this, is you probably don't want a Bronco or a Wrangler because, like we said about an hour ago, it's a little tight. I also invented a new word, a Brankler. Wonder what that would do for SEO. I digress. 3 kids, 5 to 14. They have a 3-row minivan, the Honda Elysian. I'm not sure if that's how I'm pronouncing that right. And 3 rows are a good help because, yeah, that's right. We like the Honda, but it's a 2004. Someone spilled transmission fluid on the rear carpet. Okay. And yet the barbecue sauce has not taken its place as the highlight of the back seat yet. I get it. When you have kids, ranch dressing is like all over your cars. Sometimes that's actually dad's fault too. I will say that. Total tangent. In the Jaguar, some of the older Jaguars like the XE, the parking brake kind of pull area, you could put a cup of Wendy's ranch dressing right in there. Perfect for dipping while you're at speed. Just saying. So that is parenting car smells. He would like a sports car, but he knows he needs something for the family. He also has an NA Miata for sports driving. So that's good. That's actually a helpful data point. Like Derek has his fun car. The question is like, how fun do we want to go with some of the options for more like daily driving? Here they are. VW Passat variant RS36. Loves 300 horsepower, but not smaller space. He used to have an R32 Golf. That's awesome. V12 Touareg W12. Excuse me, I said that wrong. VW Touareg W12. Toyota Land Cruiser 770 series pickup. Loves the 70 series, but his wife doesn't like the retro style, and no trunk is not a great idea. Hence my Gladiator philosophy. First gen Audi Q7, Audi RS6 Avant with the V10 twin turbo. That's kind of awesome. I don't know about that. That's pretty awesome. Price should be under about $50,000. Open to other ideas, but I want cars that are at the end of their depreciation curve, which is about 08 to 12. What do you think, Byron? I'm going to throw all of that at you. What do you think of that?
This is a pile. I don't know. Big boy job or not, I look at a $50,000 budget and I look at a W12 VW or Audi and I just can't get my head around that. I don't know that. I think it would just be more trouble than it's worth. And you're not going to cram the family into the Miata to take them around town when the Touareg's down for whatever maintenance it needs this week. So I just don't know if I can get excited about that. And I'm also a little concerned that both the Passat wagon and the RS6 wagon are just not going to give you the space you really want. I don't know, maybe the S6 has jump seats kind of like the E-Class wagons. I'm not actually certain if that's true. Maybe it does, and if it does, that makes it more appealing in the front. But I think looking at these, I think the Audi Q7 might actually be your choice because it's a 3-row, so there's plenty of room for the kids. And the Q7's always kind of been on the small side of the 3-row luxury SUV segment anyway, so you're kind of getting the downsized feel you'd want from like a wagon without having to go so small that you're running out of space. So I think that might be the sweet spot in this. Apart from that, this is such a simultaneously narrow and broad use case where it's just like, I need to take my entire family, but it can basically be anything we'll fit into that's a wide net to cast. But I think of the ones Derek has suggested, the Q7 might actually be the pick there.
I think that's actually, when I look at the list, probably the most logical option. I think, it'll probably hold up the best of all these things here. Part of me wants to lean on the Toyota, lost my train of thought there, the Land Cruiser 70 series pickup. I realize that's really not practical when you look at what you're going for here, but maybe just a more conventional Land Cruiser. That would be another thing as I kind of skate around my answer here. I think I'm going to throw the RS6 Avant is my answer, not because it's particularly logical, but looks like a lot of fun. It's a wagon. It's going to be tight. The Q7 is probably the better, more responsible answer, but I'm still going to say RS6 Avant. I think that would be a lot of fun. Just looking around, it looks like, say, a 2010 one. You had 580 horsepower. It's not nothing. Let's put it that way. 479 pound-feet of torque. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's probably going to be pretty tight. But hey, that's intriguing. Maybe like, again, I don't know what the situation of like, getting like a Cadillac CTS wagon or a Mercedes E-Class wagon of that era, how easily, he could sort of get those in Japan. I really don't know that. But that just means I'm still going to circle back and say RS6 Avant sounds like a lot of fun to me. I don't know how well that would work with 3 kids. That seems more like a 2 kids scenario. But that's kind of, when I'm looking at this list of cars here, I think that's kind of where I would land, or see what you can do with a Land Cruiser. But that could be tricky as far as pricing. So that's where I would land. Any final thoughts, Byron?
No, I mean, I'm drawn to that Land Cruiser as an option in this, just because given what it is and the fact that they've been around forever, it seems like you'd probably be able to come up with some pretty interesting, perhaps really fun on theme cargo solutions with a vehicle like that, because it seems like someone's probably made an upfitting option for pretty much anything you'd want to do with that. I mean, you could probably put an entire hotel room on the back of that if you really wanted to, right? So there's some flexibility there, and it's also just cool. But I struggle with the practicality side of it. Maybe it doesn't matter that much. Maybe he could always end up getting a third car if he really needs one. But that's just, I'm drawn to it, but I just feel like it's the odd man out in this list. It's
interesting because the truck, I mean, that cabin looks really tight to me just looking at it. Like, that seems like, I don't know. 3 kids in there seems tight. But I agree with you. From like, just like Land Cruiser is always on a list as far as I'm concerned. So, you gonna drive anywhere fun this weekend?
Well, I've got that McLaren 720S coming this weekend.
Oh, right.
So anywhere I drive is going to be fun, I think. And we're on a cap with that. We can only put so many miles on it. With the fancy things, it tends to be that way. So we're still my girlfriend and I are kind of trying to plot who we're going to go visit, like who's special enough to get to check out the McLaren this weekend.
300 miles, that'll give you some range.
Yeah, it gives us the opportunity to really kind of get around the metro area and actually make it out to where the roads turn and stuff like that. So I'm 100% looking forward to that. How about you?
Hyundai Palisade, long-term autoblogger. So we will believe this is my final weekend with it. So
you gonna take it up north or something like that?
Yeah, probably go somewhere. Probably get up to the cabin and do some fishing, and the dog will enjoy the ample space she gets in it. It's a great family cruiser. Everybody loves it. We put the car seat in the second row. It's got the captain's chairs, which I'll admit, the bench with the car seat in the middle, that's the safe thing that everybody will tell you. But my kid loves a captain's chair. So that's
nice.
You can just see better, and it's easier to get him in and out. So that's just life. So that's it. We're going to hit the road on this podcast. We encourage you to hit the road this weekend, even though gas prices are higher than they've been since who knows when. But yeah, everybody be safe out there. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.